Hi, welcome to the Infamous Fly. Today I'm going to do a wee bit of fly tying, and what I'm going to tie is this wee fly here. Now this is a bit of a battered one because it's had a fish and it's been a bit ripped, but you get the general idea. This is a fly that was given to me by one of the fishery keepers up at Burnhouse up at Allendale yesterday. I was out fishing and we were talking about wee flies and what would work in the sort of conditions, and he says, "Here, have a go at one of these," and he handed me this, and it's a fly he tied himself. Asked him later what he called it, and he was reluctant to give it a name. He just called it a wet fly variant. So given the guy's name that gave me, it's Gary McClurg that works up there, I'm going to call this a Gary McClurg because it's his fly. Now I've not been given any specific instructions how to tie these, but I asked him a couple of questions, and based on the information I've got, this is what we're going to tie. So interested me fly, caught fish, so it works. So the hook I'm going to use, I'm using a size 12 B160 Camasan. The one that I've got there's a size 10, I would say, it's a wee bit bigger. But I think it's important to use the B160 rather than the 170 or 175 because it's got a shorter shank, and it definitely makes a difference to the profile of the fly. I've tied a couple of practice, and the short shank definitely suits the fly, the profile of it. So we've got our fly in the vise here, and let's get tied on. Now I tend to use the ultra silk type thread, but you could use some, I would say something like 8/0 would be fine. You just want to tie your wraps down to just roughly in line with the point of your fly. Nip off, and we'll put in the tail first. Now this is a wee bit unusual. What we use for the tail is just golden pheasant tippets, dyed fire orange, I would say. Now you'll see on the original that it doesn't have a black end in it. Now I believe the reason for that is that he's tied them in back to front. He's tied them in deliberately, point first. So you can either do it that way, or what you can do is you can tie it in the normal way. You want the black band to be in line with where you're tying it on, and then you can nip it back later. I think it's probably better to do it this way because the profile of the feather's getting slimmer towards the tip. So tie that in. Back to about there. We can lose the wee excess bits there, it's not a problem. Okay, now the body is a favourite of mine, number 4 Glow Bright. Same stuff as I use on the red tag jig nymph. I would say it's quite important to use this stuff because it really stands out. So put that in, put it through, tie that in securely, and you're just going to bring the thread back to about halfway up the length of the body, and you want about 3 wraps of this stuff. If you like a wee bit of thicker bodied fly, you can give it a couple of laps, but in essence it's really just a tag, so you don't want it to take over the whole body of the fly. So there's a tag tied in. I'll give it a couple of wraps just to secure it up the body a wee bit. and then we have the actual main thoraxy part of the body. Now looking at it quite closely, I think it's holographic tinsel that's been used. I think you could get away with medium. I only have the small stuff here, so I'm just going to use that. But if you've got medium holographic, feel free to try that. So bring that round. And tie it back. Okay. And we'll give that a good few wraps, make sure we're covering all of the top half of the thorax area. If you feel like you need to give it a couple of wraps extra backwards and forwards, by all means do so. Now, based on my experience with this fly yesterday, because it took a fish almost right away when I used it, it did take a bit of a battering. If you chose, I think you could bug bond it, or something like that. I used Deer Creek. I used the fine Deer Creek UV resin. But if you were going to do that, I would say just be aware that it tends to dull down this trigger point, this red tag. It's a wee bit less obvious once it's got a bit bug bonded, but certainly on the flip side it's going to be a lot more resilient. So that's our body. Just check that we've got that well covered there. Yeah, I think that's okay. And then finally is the hackle. Now, it doesn't have to be anything fancy. I'm just going to use I think it's a Chinese neck, dyed black. Ideally, what I would say you want is what they call a webby sort of henny cock hackle. I don't have anything that would really meet that description. What I'm talking about with that is something that's got the sort of slightly thicker characteristics of a hen hackle, but in a slightly stiffer point. I don't really have any like that, so I'm just going to have to use what I've got here, which is just a bit of a Chinese neck cock hackle. I'll just have to give it a few extra wraps to get the hackle thick enough. I mean, it's not a particularly bushy fly, but at the same time I wouldn't call it totally sparse. So get a hackle in there, and because I'm having to use this slightly finer pointed hackle, I'm probably going to have to give this about 5 wraps to get the sort of profile. I'm not wanting it to be quite as wispy as, say, something like a cruncher or something like that. I want it to be a wee bit thicker than that. So just about there, I would say. Yep. We shall lock that off. Cut. Not for breaking that feather. Anyway, then pull it all back in a nice head. And then you can get your finishing tool or your fingers, whichever you prefer. I do both, but I sometimes find that you get a slightly neater head with a finishing tool. And then a good tighten down. This stuff is so strong, you're never going to burst it. If you're using the 8-0, be a wee bit careful. And finally, just to finish that off, just make sure they're well stroked back. To finish it off, you want to take these wee black tips out. So there we go, and that's it. Gary McClurg. hope you enjoyed that. Try a few, certainly worked for me. Worth having in your box. Cheers.